Or to computer. Okay. All right. Now we're live. Welcome to Bette's Business Book Club. We are discussing Who Moved My Cheese by Dr. Spencer Johnson. Probably the shortest book I have maybe ever read as an adult. Super short book, applies to business, to life, etc. And basically it's a telling of a story of two mice and two little people, which I guess are tiny humans. We got Sniff and Scurry are the mice, and Hem and Haw are the little people. And their names kind of imply how they behave. And the basic premise of the story is these little people and these mice live in a maze, and they run around looking for cheese. And when they find the cheese, how do they behave once they find the cheese? So Hem and Haw think, oh, great, I found my cheese. I'm going to live here. I'm going to move nearby, so I live close to my cheese. The cheese is never going to run out. I got it made. And the Sniff and Scurry are like, well, this cheese is great, but let's always be ready in case we need to find more cheese. And it's kind of a parable of how do they approach when the cheese runs out. Basically, one day the cheese that they had found runs out. Sniff and Scurry are like, all right, so be it, and they go and they find new cheese. Hem and Haw about the fact that the cheese is gone. So Hem kind of gets stuck there for a long time. Haw eventually decides, like, I better go find more cheese because otherwise I'm going to starve, and that would suck. So that's kind of it. And then as Haw goes searching for new cheese, leaves little writings on the wall in case Hem ever decides he wants to leave and go find cheese. So there's a whole bunch of them, but I kind of grabbed, there was one that had all of them at once. So it was change happens, they keep moving my cheese, anticipate change, get ready for the cheese to move, monitor change, smell the cheese often so you know when it's getting old, adapt to change quickly. The quicker you let go of old cheese, the sooner you can enjoy new cheese. Change, move with the cheese, enjoy change, savor the adventure, and enjoy the taste of new cheese. Be ready to change quickly and enjoy it again and again because they keep moving the cheese. So that's kind of the whole thing. And then it's a matter of, which of the characters do you identify with? And then which one do you want to identify with? I will say, I think I am more of a Hem than I would like to admit. Those who know me might agree. Alex, what do you think you are?
I think there's really aspects of all of it. And I think, it's just, to me, it's funny because you didn't read the end discussion you said. And I think what's kind of neat about how the book is structured that I found, because this is my second time reading this, not a big tome, it wasn't very complicated.
Right.
So you've got the, I don't know, high school or college friends for their reunion.
Yeah, they're high school friends that come back and meet up later.
Right, so they're getting together. So what's interesting about it is there's really the two stories here, right? So there's the high school friends get together, where that's the meta story, right? Where he tells about his story about the mice, and then they're like, oh, tell us the story. And then they tell the story.
Right.
And then they discuss it. And what's interesting about that is that final wrap-up discussion is kind of what you're doing. Like, how do people see different parts in there? So there's like the high school quarterback. How could you be scared of anything? Well, there's the guy who took over the family business. Everything should be fine, but he was scared to make changes, and now the business is falling apart. And it's clearly like a Walmart destroying them chain of like businesses. I mean, that's clearly the parable in there, right?
Yeah.
But what I think is interesting about it is by approaching it this way with such a silly story about mice, right? You let your guard down. Because if you sit there and you're like, okay, why are you hemming and hawing? Time to move on in life, you get defensive. But when you're reading a story about mice and mice-sized people, well, right? It's hard to get offended on behalf of the fake people, right?
Right.
But you start to see it because we've all had that where we're in a job, something comes in, someone new happens, you're in business, and you don't want to adapt to the change. You're hoping that it's temporary, and it rarely is.
It'll
Like
get
things
better.
never, right? Things never really snap back. Once things start to change, and as people, we're like the little people. We're really hard to adapt to that change. Versus, Sniff, his life is very simple. Does he smell cheese? If so, he's there. Scurry's life is very simple. He runs looking for cheese. When he finds cheese, he eats cheese. When he does not, he runs for more cheese. Hem and Haw, that's really the interesting thing. Like they build their life around the cheese, and then when it changes, they can't adapt, right? So the mice just run. It was the same thing with all of us, and that's you have like the high school friends, the one who defined himself as always being a part of this business that had been there for generations and served the community. His problem wasn't he couldn't adapt to the big business coming in to compete. He knew how to handle that. He expressed that. It was not being able to handle the fact that you had to accept the change.
Right.
So I will say, having had, sat there in business meetings, same exact thing as his story, right? You have some friends who have been with the company for years, maybe decades. You don't want to let go. You don't want to make changes. And as a result, the whole business implodes and everyone loses their job.
Yeah.
And, we've all seen that in businesses we've been a part of where you don't make the tough decisions. So the lack of decision becomes the decision. And was it Hem that's dying of starvation, but won't
Yeah,
leave?
because he won't leave.
Chase
He's like,
agency.
no, someone brings back the cheese eventually, and I will stay here until that happens.
Right. It looks kind of like it's almost like a sitcom plot, right? Like he gets up, he gets dressed for work so that, puts on his running shoes.
Comes back, he's ready.
But even if it's not, it's like he'd rather starve to death than admit that he's got to go find a new job.
Right.
I think I've seen that sitcom like 12 times, right? Like there's a storyline. I'm sure Al Bundy did it in Married with Children. Like it's a trope.
Yeah.
Right. But Sniff and Scurry have no ego.
Right.
They're mice.
They have no. They're
right.
Like purely reacting to the situation around them.
Right. And that's where I think this is really, it's cute because you see it in yourself. You see that, the world changes. How do you adapt? Sometimes you adapt well. Sometimes you're like, oh, this is temporary, but it's not. Or, everyone will see everything's going in the wrong direction. Everyone will see the error of their ways. No one ever sees the error of their ways. They just keep going.
You don't see it when you're in it. You only see it from the outside. Whether that's later on looking back, or if you're watching someone else do it and you're like, come on, moron, why can't you see what's happening here? Somebody else can see it, but you're too staring at the wall of the maze, hoping your cheese comes back to appreciate, what's really the situation. I mean, I'll say the last firm that I worked at, things were getting worse and worse. They were like taking away that cheese so quickly. And I'm like, this is okay. It'll be all right. Well, let's see what happens when, the new maze master comes in and maybe they'll bring us better cheese. And it was like, oh no, this cheese is like so rotten. It's not even funny. And then eventually I had to leave. So the same idea, but I watched people in my department leave like one at a time. They're like, this sucks. They were sniffing and scurrying their way out of there. And I was like, oh, let's see what happens. And nothing good happened. So eventually I had to haw and get myself out.
Right. And what's really funny is, last time that happened and, my department kind of got dismantled after I left, which isn't so shocking. What was interesting is when I left, stayed, set myself a timeline, actually didn't hem and haw like normal, set a timeline, said, I will try this for a quarter. When that didn't work, move on. Had many members of my team who, felt it wasn't going to get, just couldn't handle the fact that there was a change going on. And we're like, you're going to regret leaving here. And it's like, no, like, look at the direction it's going. This isn't where we want to be. And you kind of see, how does that work? And sometimes it's it's always change imposed on you that you don't want, right? Like that's what this is about. Your cheese got moved.
Right. Not self-imposed change. Someone else moving your cheese. That's who moved my cheese.
Right. But you think you should approach it like Scurry, like you get up and run. And your first job out of college, you're kind of like that.
Yeah.
Like something goes wrong there, you're like, whatever, I quit and I'll have a new job in a day.
Yeah.
Like life doesn't become, you get further in your career. There are plenty of entry-level accounting and programming jobs, in the early 2000s.
Right.
Less so
But
when you're
once you
looking.
moved your whole life to be near your cheese, right? And maybe you've got other little people that live with you and depend on you.
Mhm.
And you think like, if I lose this cheese, is the other cheese that I have to go find, like, can I find it fast enough? Is it going to be enough cheese for everyone? Maybe if I just stay here, this will be okay. Yeah, it's how life
And
goes.
can you admit, I think some of it that's really interesting is you see in the Hem character, like I said, you see that sitcom character that won't admit it. Like he's dying of starvation, he's becoming emaciated, but every day he follows his routine, lest somebody know the cheese station C was empty.
Yeah. Um,
You know,
I thought one thing that was neat here, like when Haw's having his whole like self-reflection when he goes and finds his new cheese station that has even better and more cheese than he had before. He said he realized the fastest way to change is to laugh at your own folly. Then you can let go and quickly move on. And I think a lot of people struggle with that. It's kind of why Hem is stuck, right? You can't be like, oh, how silly. I thought the cheese was coming back. Nope, it didn't. I'm just going to move on. And I think it is that tied to, like you said, tied to the ego. And like, no, I can't admit that this happened. But if you can be like, yeah, this happened, it sucks. Haha, okay, let me go find new cheese. You end up better off because you can move on.
yeah, and I would definitely recommend reading those follow-up discussions that are only a handful of pages at the end of the
I
book.
got most of it.
Because there's definitely some
I had 5 pages left.
if you miss the metaphor, they smack you in the head there, right? But one of the when you're in the metaphor, Sniff noticed that the cheese was getting smellier and smellier. So we're starting, but they didn't care as long as there was edible cheese. Sniff showed up.
Right.
As soon as there were not edible cheese, Scurry took off and Sniff went looking. Right, like there was that's the instinct thing, but you see it with the friends, and they're all shocked, and they can't admit it to themselves. I think there's one who's like marriage is imploding. I forget exactly what it is, but it's the usual, middle-aged friends. What the hell happened to us 20 years after high school? So again, these are all TV and movie tropes. I don't know which came first, this book or the trope, but you see that in there, and it's really it really is all in how we respond to change. Can we admit that things aren't going right? Do we hide it? Are we open about it? What does this all mean? And how much of our ego is wrapped up in it? Because clearly that's Hem's problem.
Yeah.
Hem would rather die than try something new.
Yeah.
Haw, Hems and Haws, right? That's the thing. But Haw eventually decides, death is not the right option. But it's true. We're all, you get stuck. You follow a business decision you made a few years ago that may or may not have ever made sense, may make sense, but how often you never want to revisit these things and admit there might be a mistake.
Right. Yeah.
Sitting here right now evaluating technology platforms, and we've got one CRM that we kind of know but it sucks, and then there's like, well, we want it, but it's like, are you do the work?
Oop. Did we lose you, Alex?
I might have clicked it.
You're back.
Yeah, well, yeah. So yeah, I mean, that's really the to me, it's all, what do you think about how do you learn to react? How do you learn to, there's always going to be some hemming and hawing with people. We're never going to be the mice.
Right.
But how do you react faster? Better to be Haw than Hem.
Yeah.
You
don't want to die for your stubbornness and unwillingness
right.
to change on the horizon.
The dead middle-aged guy in the ill-fitting jumpsuit of Hem is kind of the depressing image, right?
But it's like when you hear about people who literally die at their desk, right? It's like could never move on, stuck there, whatever, it's just kind of sad. I don't think any of us want to be Hem.
Right, but we all do it.
Yeah.
And that's the point of the story, right? You go from the process from Hem to Haw, And then you laugh at yourself. You have to learn to laugh at yourself and be like, I'd have been better Scurry, who has no plan. Scurry just runs.
Right. Oh, sometimes that's not so great either.
Well, certainly better than sitting there in the pit.
Well, yeah, it's better than sitting and, dying in the maze in your cheese block N or whatever the hell he was at. But I mean, there's certainly, I think, a bit of hawing to do about just worrying about if you do the wrong thing, because sometimes you could do the wrong thing and it's not better. I think it's probably better than starving, but it might not be better than where you're at. And I think that's why you have the hem and the haw. You have to kind of weigh those things.
Right. In this case, the correct solution was the scurry.
Yeah.
But sometimes that's not the right solution, right? Like you have to figure out, because sometimes someone did move your cheese and the change is bad and it's permanent. And sometimes something stupid happened.
Yeah.
Okay, what do they say not to do in a stock market crash? Panic sell, because
Right.
you often sell at the bottom.
Right.
That's
you
the
don't want to
natural.
scurry.
Right.
That's a bad scurry.
Right. On the other hand, and when there's an obvious change, like new ownership of a company, you immediately, you're on the lookout for it, because now you're not shocked that someone's moving the cheese. The problem is when it becomes more subtle, right? Something happens that you're not aware of and you may or may not notice. And all of a sudden it's like the process has gotten a little more cumbersome, or like you said, the people were leaving one by one, you don't notice. And all of a sudden you look around and you're like, I'm not the captain. Why am I going down with the ship?
But I think it can be even more subtle than that. Like, okay, so we'll talk about my practice, right? Since you're so involved right now in helping me with that part, there's that saying, evolve or die, or some such thing. If I let things stagnate and keep doing things as they've been, I end up in such a disadvantage versus other people who are keeping up with the technology, the technological changes, seeing these cool new features and utilizing them to streamline and make the things more efficient. If you don't sniff out those little cheese changes, you don't feel like something's changing so much because you're doing the same thing, but some of the goalposts are moving on you. And there it's the technology, right? It's not necessarily the cheese moved. It's like, well, the maze shifted a little and you didn't notice.
So one of our things right now, getting off Zoho on this, business that has increased 8-fold in the last 3 years. And Zoho is a great small business tool, but not up there. Well, much of the team has just latched onto Salesforce because that's the big one everyone knows. And someone's taking a look at that, like, is this the right piece of technology? Is this what we want?
Is this good?
And right, but sometimes it becomes, this is what so you're just running to it. So if of CNN, maybe there's a better one out there. And sometimes, and there's really the challenge. Like sometimes you're better off saying, okay, I've got 2 good options, pick one, or I've got one option I know. They wouldn't have been better off 3 months earlier to have abandoned C while it was still good and left.
Mhm.
You could have done that if you're like, oh, I'm not willing to commit to C. The commitment phobia would also get you there too. And they would have, who knows what would happen. It took Haw quite a while to find new cheese.
Right.
And there was still good cheese at C.
Right.
But, that's not the usual problem. But you see that. You see people unable to commit and therefore they make no decision.
Yeah, which is still a decision, as you said before.
Right.
All right, I don't think there's anything else to really discuss with this. It's
No, it's about as long as you have to read the book.
Yeah. I think I fell asleep when I first started reading it. That's why I didn't quite finish it. So I think for the next month, for January, because this is very, very appropriate for me anyway, I want to read this book. It's called Subscribed: Why the Subscription Model Will Be Your Company's Future and What to Do About It.
Sounds good.
Tien Zhu, Tzou. And then I think the month after that, I'm going to do Delivering Happiness, which is the story of how Zappos was built and how they focused on customer happiness as like one of their top things. So
Who was built that?
Zappos, the shoe,
Zappos, okay.
the shoe people.
Are they still in business?
Yeah, they're owned by Amazon, I think.
They were out for a while. Not a
I
business
think they got bought by Amazon and they've just been,
Oh, Amazon bought their
Yeah.
Amazon bought their cheese. Okay.
that's one way to make sure you don't run out of cheese and no one moves it, just buy it all.
You'll
All right,
send
you'll put a
us-
link up in the group.
Yeah, you'll send us a
Yeah.
link.
All right.
We'll actually try to read it. We would have read it, but we didn't
still don't have
we
it.
didn't
We
get the
still don't
book
get the
yet.
book.
We got a different book.
All right.
All right, I'm gonna cut the live feed.
Okay, good seeing both of you.
I'm gonna, oh, Alex already popped off. All right, I'm gonna.
Love you.